Hello, this is the mathematics and quantum mechanics of consciousness presented in an easy to understand way. This video makes a very bold claim to resolve all of reality in a scientific, satisfying way that should make it easy for people to understand. Johns Hopkins professor Sean Carroll, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Greene have all referenced the Schrodinger cat in the box thought experiment. No real cats were involved, as a reference to the absurdity of superposition. Average people and thinkers, most any biologists, do not consider their view of the biggest mystery in all of reality. What the heck is superposition? There appears to be two possible outcomes. The world branches into ever many worlds, or we could collapse the wave function into the one world that we know and love. 7% of physicists believe the pilot wave interpretation of quantum mechanics. 15% of physicists believe ever many worlds. 36% of physicists today believe measurement requires an observation posited by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg in Copenhagen 1927, 100 years ago from this video. These are radically different frameworks. Religions. Would Johns Hopkins professor tell you a cat exists in multiple states at once?
Sleep. There will be two worlds, and it happens long before you open the box, because as soon as the other stuff in the box, as soon as the photons and the atoms and everything become entangled with the cat, boom, there's two worlds.
This video shall dive deep into the new mathematics and science shortly. For now, you need to understand we can have many worlds, or we can have one world. And if we have one world, then we need a decision that hasn't been introduced into any interpretation of quantum mechanics that we have so far in a satisfactory way that avoids paradox. So we need a decision to resolve many worlds into one. Mathematically, we treat both outcomes as correct at present because that's how we fathom it. However, it's when we measure quantum objects up to 7,000 atoms big now in superposition, we collapse that version of reality. If we use Schrodinger's cat as an example of macro-level superposition beyond 7,000 atoms, we collapse the outcome after we open the box, after we measure. Before we measure, superposition everywhere. After we measure, collapse. And that alters the history of the particles. It alters the position of the cat. It gives the cat a history. This isn't my view. This is what quantum collapse is as advertised by modern physics. Today I brought a guest speaker. I'd like to introduce Google Home. I brought Google to quickly fact check me on two very important points. And I will put Google Home away and deliver my presentation resolving all of reality in a satisfactory way shortly. My hope is Google can offer some clarity to the facts here. Hey Google Gemini, I just suggested that when we measure a superposition we collapse a particle that then demonstrates a history and acts like it had always been there. Can you succinctly explain in under 100 words to me the same thing or correct me if in error?
Your understanding is excellent. Prior to measurement, a quantum system exists in a superposition of all possible states. The act of measurement is a non-unitary process that forces the wave function to collapse, projecting the particle onto a single, definite eigenstate. This selected state then behaves classically, as if it had been the only reality all along. However, it was genuinely a mixture until the measurement irreversibly fixed its property according to the Born rule probabilities.
Secondly, hey Google, in under 40 words, teach why Copenhagen interpretation suggests the history of the cat on a macro level is created after we open the box and look at the cat in the future.
Here is the concise explanation. A quantum system exists in a superposition of states. Measurement causes the wave function to instantaneously collapse, projecting the particle into a single, definite state. The system then behaves as if it always held that property, but the definitive reality, the fixed history, was only actualized at the moment of the irreversible measurement, consistent with the Born rule.
Hey Google, In under 40 words, teach why Copenhagen interpretation suggests the history of the cat on a macro level is created after we open the box. After we open the box and look at the cat.
The Copenhagen interpretation asserts that the cat is in a superposition of states until observation. Opening the box causes wave function collapse, creating the definite macroscopic reality and fixed history, alive or dead, at that exact moment.
So you just heard it for yourself from my guest, Google Home Gemini. She can go now. Thank you, Google Home Gemini. You're an excellent guest. Thank you. So the point we were trying to make here is that the history is not resolved until after we open the box. You, the listener of this video, must recognize that history selection done by that measurement is the core to understanding the physics of reality. History is created by random collapses according to 36% of physicists who currently endorse Copenhagen interpretation. So nothing I've said so far should raise any eyebrows. But what if we selected history somehow on a subconscious level? Selected them. 36% of physicists think observers are necessary in quantum mechanics. This video suggests a new concept in physics. Weighted observer collapse, WOC. Quantum mechanics troubles our understanding of space-time and appended determinism, which also suggests multiple outcomes if Penrose is to be taken seriously. Quantum mechanics is better defined by Nobel laureate Brian Josephine in his How Observers Create Reality paper in 2015. But he stopped short of adding observer weight. He still allows random. Random. Probabilities. It's all dice rolls. In this one interpretation, history is selected. You select history. This video is going to outline what the world would look like and all the answers it would resolve if we allowed ever many worlds to be decided by us. This one framework links collapse, mind, memory, time, evolution, desire, reality, and religion. This framework resolves ever many worlds into the one world we know and love, and literally solves all the questions we have about life and nature and mind in a satisfactory way. In this video, that is my bold claim here. I suggest that if you watch this video, you can fully comprehend how thoughts themselves work if you do the mathematics. Johns Hopkins professor Sean Carroll would look you in the eyes and tell you that Schrodinger's cat can be alive in one world, but dead inside a totally different world. This is called the ever many worlds interpretation. Grown men, famous scientists of our era, would argue over the immortal cat in that ever many worlds interpretation like it's not absolutely crazy. So if I tell you we can fix quantum mechanics by adding some arithmetic, it's not as far-fetched as what modern science is already telling us. Interpretations are what we do to resolve the largest mystery in the universe. Why quantum mechanics is so weird.
So there's a universe in which I see it alive and a universe in which I see it dead. And the whole thing is just a big ensemble of probabilities called a wave function. So it was initially a kind of thing to say, well, this is a bit weird. It's got weird implications, quantum mechanics. And ultimately, it does have weird implications. And so that's it.
This video will resolve quantum mechanics fully. A bold claim with good answers. And we're getting there. In experiments such as the double slit experiment, we can see the atoms seem to behave as if they could be in multiple places at the same time. This video is aimed at physicists and clever people. I have other videos that are aimed to simplify this topic. People who have hopefully at least heard of quantum mechanics and its applied mathematics is who this video is aimed towards. Richard Feynman taught superposition this way. In reality contains the only mystery. Max Born, Olivia Newton-John's grandpa, said, the motion of the particle follows probability laws, but the probability itself propagates in accordance with causal laws. In this presentation, we must alter the Born rule because it assumes random probabilities which fails to resolve paradox. Erwin Schrödinger said entanglement is the characteristic trait of quantum mechanics, the one that enforces its entire departure from classical lines of thought. Superposition is what quantum mechanics is, according to Schrödinger. So Eugene Wigner said it was not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to the consciousness. And they're talking about observer effect, but they're not talking about a weighted observer. They're just talking about like a random observer. If you randomly observe stuff, it makes stuff happen. But they don't say it makes stuff happen, but they say you need it to have. Now, all of the suggestions, all of this suggests two observers are equal. Do you think two observers are equal? That things are all random? Is that intuitive to you? This video is about an interpretation of quantum mechanics that suggests decision is involved in every Planck scale moment of time. All locus of comparison collapses reality based on thought. Let's start there. What I'm about to say is not a minor adjustment to quantum mechanics. It is the missing architecture. It is the piece that explains not only the measurement, but memory, mind, teleology, biological form, sex drive, and the strange fact that reality behaves as though history itself is being selected. Quantum mechanics has survived every experimental assault we have thrown at it, and yet it officially story about reality remains unfinished. We are told to accept the Born rule because it works. Fine, it works, but let's not pretend that a successful statistical rule is not the same thing as an explanation, and there are no now moments. To say that squared amplitudes gives outcome frequency is not to say why one experienced world is selected rather than another. It's just bookkeeping. It's not the mystery. It's not the solution. It's not the ontology. And when the usual interpretations are asked to explain that selection, they fall apart in different ways. Materialism shrugs and calls consciousness a byproduct, as if awareness were some accidental exhaust fume from chemistry. Many worlds solves the problem by saying everything goes. It's not depth. Multiplying worlds is not an explanation. It's just bad accounting for people too timid to explain where this interpretation must go. My view begins where those evasions fail. The Born rule is incomplete. It is not wrong in the narrow sense, but it is missing the decisive factor, the weight of observer-linked expectation across the block universe. In standard quantum mechanics, an outcome is weighted by amplitude squared. In my model, that is only the local skeleton. The real selector is amplitude squared multiplied by a global observer weight. A block universe's weighting term contributed simultaneous Planck-like observer moments distributed throughout spacetime. In other words, collapse is not a dice roll. Collapse is weighted history selection by us. Quantum mechanics gives the menu. The block universe gives the appetite. That is not the first principle. Reality is not built by random throws. Reality is selected from among available histories by a weighting process that includes observers as physical contributors, not observers as mystical decorations, not observers as laboratory nuisances, but observers as part of the machinery itself by which one world becomes chosen and actual. This is why the block universe matters. Relativity already destroyed the childish fantasy that only the present is real. Minkowski spacetime does not contain a magical glowing now. Moving across a dead background gives us a four-dimensional order in which past, present, and future are space-time coordinates in a single structure. Once that is understood, we've known this for over 120 years, is the old materialist prejudice towards one-way causation begins to look less like science and more like habit. We didn't have any alternatives to brain memory 200 years ago. And once the block universe is taken seriously, retrocausality stops being some embarrassment. But we're not talking about faster than light signaling here. This is the history selection. Not science fiction nonsense, something deeper. When a measurement occurs, what is selected is not merely a present result. A whole consistent history is selected with it. And we're all collapsed when it collapsed when it collapsed. We're being collapsed from our future. Collapse does not merely pin down what happens next, it pins down what must have happened for that result to exist coherently at all. This is Aristotle's teleology. That is why Wigner's friend matters so much. Wigner's friend is not a cute puzzle. It is the confession that quantum mechanics becomes unstable the moment we put observers inside of it. We do not have one measurement. We have measurements within measurements within measurements. Observers within observers. Wigner's friend after Wigner's friend. A detector is measured by an observer who is measured by another observer who is measured again by the wider world observers. If reality is to remain coherent, then local stochastic collapse is too thin a story. One needs a global consistency condition. My model provides it. The realized world is the history with sufficient total observer weight across nested levels of participation. Everett solves the problem by saying every branch survives. I solve it by saying branches are only candidates. Only one history accumulates enough weight to become the world we actually live in. That leads directly to memory. Standard neuroscience treats memory as if the brain were a storage locker, a damp little filing cabinet of engrams, synapses, and molecular scribbles. Of course, brains change during recall and learning, but no one denies that. But correlation is not containment. A screen changes when you stream a film, but that does not mean the movie is stored in the glass. The brain is not the library, it is the terminal. If collapse is whole history selection within a block universe, then the past does not vanish into metaphysical oblivion. It remains part of the accessible information structure from which realized histories are drawn and against which alternatives are weighed. Memory, therefore, does not need to be fundamentally stored in tissue. Tissue is the interface. The deeper storage is in the space-time ledger itself. This is where CPT symmetry becomes more than a formal curiosity. In orthodox physics, CPT symmetry is an invariance principle. In my interpretation, it also points to the deeper ledger of alternatives that makes weighting possible at all. Memory is not a private secretion of neurons. It is relation to a larger structure in which realized and alternative histories are formally available to be weighed. That is why memory cannot ultimately be inside the brain. The brain is simply too provincial a machine to contain what experience is actually drawn from. And once memory is no longer trapped in the skull, materialism loses its favorite toy, because if memory is not fundamentally brain storage, and if consciousness participates in history selection, then mind is not the late accidentally foam on top of matter. Mind is fundamental. Non-brain memory makes consciousness fundamental in everything. Now, if one wants a mathematical language for the enduring self, one does not need mysticism. Carl Friston has already done the hard work. The free energy principle gives us a framework in which living systems are self-organizing inferential structures. Markov blankets separate internal from external states through sensory and active boundaries. A living system persists by minimizing variational free energy, by maintaining its model of the world in itself against entropic dissolution. That's not hand-waving, that is mathematics. But Friston's framework has been interpreted too timidly within biology. The real subject is not the temporary human body. The real enduring subject is the Markov blanketed inferential structure itself. That is the baseline personification. Personification, soul, Markov blanket. That is the thing that lasts. The organism is the one expression of it. It's not its essence. The body is an episode. The observer pattern is the continuity. And once that is understood, consciousness is no longer an accidental byproduct of neural machinery. Consciousness is fundamental, participating in the weighting process by which the world becomes actual. The enduring self is not merely a human animal stumbling through one lifetime. It is a persistent inferential boundary movement through embodiments, dreamscape to dreamscape, history to history, life to life. That is why this is an idealist interpretation of quantum mechanics. Many people are not allowed to consider this idea of quantum collapse because it removes mind and from brain body. Darwin makes sense in materialism, yes. Blind variation, local selection, no purpose, no mind, no meaning beyond survival. It is tiny, mechanical, and spiritually vacant enough to be materialist. But intelligent design makes far more sense in an idealist universe where future compatible forms help weight the history that produced them. Not crude intelligent design, not a cosmic animal, not a cosmic Candyman bolting lungs into primates, but teleological creationism distributed across time itself. You had to live the lifetime of a male and a female crab because you expect to have thumbs. You have lungs because our expectation of lungs makes us live the lifetime of plants simultaneously to exactly now. The future does not merely inherit the past. The future helps select the past that can lead to it. So now you can look at your fancy bipedal self and say, wow, I got all this fancy stuff that you built through many, many lifetimes. And that is why I say it plainly. If we expect to have lungs, poof, we have lived as plants to intelligently design them. If we expect to move, poof, we have lived the lifetime of a fish to learn movement and gills. If we expect thumbs, we must intelligently design them by living the lifetime of crabs, learning to grab. It's better than rocket science. Lifetime to lifetime, dreamscape to dreamscape, we build add-ons. People hear lines like that and think they are hearing poetry. They are not. They are hearing plain language consequences of temporary distributed design. Evolution is real, but its deeper engine is not blind accidentally stumbling uphill. It's history selection. Evolution is the visible residue of future compatible form waiting the histories that bring it into being. Biological history is the scaffold erected by observer participation across space-time. Want to go deeper into the mind? This also explains sex drive better than the usual sterile reductionism ever could. Materialism tells us our sex drive is just genes, hormones, selection, Sigmund Freud stuff, reproductive fitness. That is the surface description, not an ultimate explanation. It describes the machinery inside of a slice of time that refuses to ask why that machinery exists in the first place. My answer is simpler. Our sex drive exists because humans in 5,000 years expect to exist. We're forced to breed because the humans in 5,000 years are selfishly collapsing realities in which they exist. The rotten buggers. The histories that include them are favored over histories that erase them. Reproduction in lived experience is what that future participation feels like when translated into present biology. So yes, our sex drive exists because future humans expect to exist. Not metaphorically, physically. Within the logic of the model, teleology is not some pious sermon pasted on a science. It is the mechanics of history selection once one stops worshipping linear time. And then there is Schrodinger's cat, perhaps the most abused theoretical animal in the history of physics. The point of the cat is not to giggle over paradoxes forever like graduate students discovering irony for the first time. The point is to force the question, what selects the realized state? My answer is that if collapse is expectation weighted, then a sufficiently coherent expectation structure biases the realized history towards the branch compatible in that expectation. A positive thinking Schrodinger manifests an alive cat, not because thought is cheap magic, but because thought is one form of observer weight in the collapsed ledger. I just told you the mechanics of law of attraction and magic in this video. Now, of course, the system is never truly closed. It never can be. The fantasy of total isolation is just that, a fantasy. Every system is embedded in the larger block universe order, in the infinity of forever, in nested observational structures that leak boundary conditions in every direction. So the outcome is never merely the result of a local sealed box. It is the result of a wider weighting structure onto which that box is already submerged in so many deep levels from the future. This is why thoughts matter. These words matter. This sentence matters. This speech matters. They are not passive commentary on a dead mechanical universe. Every word in this sentence has its own thought form and thought. It's its own Markov blanket. They're part of the weighting by which reality is continuously selected. The world is not merely observed, it is participated into form. Everyone in the room gets a say on collapsing what they expect in that room, and the most expectations win. And this taken together explains far more than the timid interpretations ever will. It explains measurement problem by replacing blind stochastic collapse with weighted history selection. Our many worlds becomes the one world we know and love. It explains retrocausality not in a faster than light way, but in a history selection way. Because collapse selects consistent past, not merely future outcomes. It explains memory, because storage belongs to the larger space-time ledger, CPT ledger, rather than the brain tissue alone. We've had smarter, more reliable and viable alternatives to brain memory for over 120 years. The true enduring self is a Markov blanketed inferential structure rather than a disposable organism. It explains teleological creationism because future compatible forms weight the histories that generate them. It explains sex drive and biological compulsion because future observers are already part of the causal accounting. Materialism cannot do this. It can describe surfaces, it can describe mechanisms inside one temporal slice. It can tell charming little stories about chemistry, eventually becoming self-aware as if consciousness were some clerical error committed by sacks of mostly liquid sacks of mostly carbon or whatever it was. But it cannot explain why actuality is singularity, why memory reaches beyond matter, why observers matter, why teleological keeps sneaking back into, or why reality behaves as though meaning is not an afterthought. My interpretation does explain it. My interpretation explains thoughts themselves as the weight of every collapse steering us towards a destination that must be fulfilled. Procrastination is putting off something, but then you'll get a burst of energy to finish your project all at once because the universe expects you to fulfill your deed. Even though you goofed off for 2 weeks and you didn't do it, you'll have like a burst of energy that'll give you the energy to fulfill that because you're on your... If the universe expects you to do something, it'll get done. So reality is not fundamentally a heap of dead particles rolling meaningless through internal space. Reality is a weighted dreamscape of space-time alternatives in which observer participation selects lived history. Matter is the stable appearance of that process. Memory is access into that process. Mind is fundamental within that process. Evolution is the retrospective trace of that process. And collapse is the mechanism by which one coherent world is continuously chosen from a richer landscape of possibilities. So I'm not offering one more decorative interpretation to place beside the others on the shelf. I'm offering the full architecture and resolution to quantum mechanics itself as this one interpretation. You don't need me to explain this interpretation of quantum mechanics to you. Expectation causing quantum collapses or weighted observer collapse explains everything, but you have to take the weighted observer across all of space-time. You can't just take from any one now moment, because now moments don't exist in our universe. So I'm offering the reason consciousness is not a side effect, but a primitive. I'm offering the reason history is not merely inherited, but we select it, and I'm offering it because this is true. Thank you. This solves all of reality in a short video. So I hope you like it. If you understand what is said here and you agree with it, then you should have to share. You feel free to share. I think we're sort of obligated to teach this to mankind. So be blessed. Blessed be. I'm Wayne Hilborn.